I'll never forget the first time I saw life return to Eleanor Richardson's eyes. The 89-year-old woman sat in her wheelchair, staring at the man in front of her. But her gaze was different. There was a light in her eyes I hadn't seen in the last 30 years. That morning, everything changed. Eleanor Richardson was the richest woman in our town. She lived off the $50 million fortune left by her husband Walter's oil company. But money meant nothing to her. Since she lost her son David in 1994, Eleanor had just been breathing, not living. When the doorbell rang that morning, the housekeeper Maria answered as usual, but the man at the door, my God, he looked so much like David that Maria's knees started shaking. The same blue eyes, the same jaw structure. Even the small scar on the left corner of his lip was identical. The man introduced himself as David Richardson. David Richardson, who had been missing for 30 years, who everyone knew was dead. He said he wanted to see Eleanor. Maria called me in panic. I was Eleanor's niece and handled all her affairs. When I rushed to the house, Eleanor had already started talking to the man. They were sitting in the living room. Eleanor's hands were trembling, but there was such happiness on her face. She was smiling for the first time in 30 years. Before we continue with this incredible story, hit that subscribe button for more unbelievable true stories that will leave you speechless. The man knew everything. David's treehouse where he fell when he was 7. His dog Rusty's death. The Italian lullaby Eleanor sang to him every night before bed. He even shared secrets that only David and his mother knew. Things nobody else could possibly know. I immediately tried to intervene. This had to be a scam. It had to be. I had buried David's body. I had read the police reports. He couldn't have survived that car accident. But Eleanor wasn't listening to me. Her eyes were only on that man. The man calmly turned to me and mentioned a detail even I didn't know. He said there was a hidden compartment behind the closet in David's room that nobody knew about, and David's diary was hidden there. I ran upstairs. I pushed the closet, and there it was, really there, pages filled with David's handwriting in a dusty notebook. Eleanor started crying. My son, is it really you? She whispered. The man held Eleanor's hands and said, Mom, I finally came home. At that moment, Eleanor's heart could have stopped from happiness, but it didn't. Instead, it was as if 30 years of mourning had suddenly ended. Family members started arriving one by one. After hearing the news, my brother Thomas was furious. This is insane. David is dead. We all saw his funeral, he shouted. Our cousins were in shock. Some wanted to believe. Some absolutely refused. The man, without any panic, told everyone personal memories about David. He told Thomas about the fishing trip they took together in 1992, how Thomas fell in the water, and David saved him. Thomas's face went white because only he and David knew this story. But I was still suspicious. I said we needed to do a DNA test. The man didn't object at all. Of course, he said calmly. I'll do whatever it takes for my mother's peace of mind. That night, Eleanor wanted to sleep in David's old room for the first time in 30 years. The man stayed in the next room. In the middle of the night, I heard sounds from Eleanor's room. When I cracked open the door, I saw Eleanor hugging that man and crying. I missed you so much, son. Every day, every hour, I thought of you, she was saying. The next morning, we went to the hospital for the DNA test. Dr. Klein was Eleanor's family friend of 40 years. He personally conducted the test. He said the results would come in 48 hours. During those 48 hours, the house was literally divided in two. One side believed this man was David. The other side insisted he was definitely a fraud. The man was very calm during this time. He spent hours with Eleanor. They looked through old photo albums. He told stories from David's childhood. I heard Eleanor's laughter that I hadn't heard in years. The woman had practically been reborn. But things were about to get even more complicated. The second night, while everyone was asleep, I decided to do my own investigation. I snuck into the man's room and went through his belongings. What I found made my blood run cold. He had documents, lots of them, medical records, psychiatric evaluations, and photographs of David from angles I'd never seen before. But the most disturbing thing was a letter written in David's handwriting, dated just 1 week before his supposed death. The letter read, "If something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Trust no one, especially not Uncle Richard." Uncle Richard was Eleanor's brother-in-law, who had died 5 years ago from a heart attack, or at least that's what we were told. The next morning, I confronted the man privately. He looked at me with those eerily familiar blue eyes and said something that made my skin crawl. "Sarah, I know you were only 12 when it happened, but you saw something that night, didn't you?" At the hospital, my heart stopped. I had never told anyone what I saw at the hospital the night David died. I was there with my parents, and I had snuck away to find a vending machine. I saw Uncle Richard in the corridor, talking to someone in scrubs. They were exchanging something minimal, and then Richard said, "Make sure the body is unrecognizable." I was young and scared. I never said anything. I convinced myself I had misunderstood. But now, this man, this supposed David, knew about it. "How do you know about that?" I whispered. He pulled out another document. It was a medical report from a hospital in Mexico, dated 2 years after David's death. The patient's name was blacked out, but the injuries described matched exactly what David would have sustained in the accident. The patient had survived, but with severe amnesia and facial reconstruction surgery. "I didn't remember anything for years," he said. "They told me my name was Michael. I lived in Mexico, worked as a translator, but then 3 years ago, I started having dreams, memories, a woman singing an Italian lullaby, a big house with white columns, a mother who loved me more than life itself." Eleanor had been listening from the doorway. I hadn't heard her wheelchair approaching. The look on her face wasn't surprise. It was recognition. "I knew it," she said. "A mother knows. I felt it in my bones that you weren't really gone." Thomas burst in then, waving his phone. "The DNA results came early," he announced. "Dr. Klein called me directly." He paused, his face pale. "It's a match. This is David." The room exploded. Some family members were crying. Others were shouting that it was impossible. But I noticed something. The man, David, didn't look relieved. He looked sad. "There's more," he said quietly. Everyone fell silent. "I came back for Mom, yes, but also for justice. Uncle Richard didn't work alone. The accident was staged. They wanted the inheritance, but they didn't count on me surviving." Eleanor's face hardened. Richard always resented Walter for being more successful. "But I never thought." She turned to Thomas. "Your father knew something, didn't he? That's why he and Richard stopped talking right before David's accident." Thomas nodded slowly. "Dad found discrepancies in the company books. Richard had been embezzling. He told me years later, but by then Richard was dead, and Dad thought it was better to let it go." But David shook his head. "Richard wasn't working alone. Someone in this room helped him. Someone who's been managing your finances for 30 years, Eleanor. Someone who made sure you never looked too closely at where your money was going." All eyes turned to Marcus, Eleanor's financial advisor and Thomas's best friend. He had been standing in the corner, silent until now. His face was sweating. "That's ridiculous," Marcus stammered. "I've been loyal to this family for decades." David pulled out a final document. "Then explain why you've been sending monthly payments to a private account in the Cayman Islands, the same account Richard used." The same account that's been paying for the medical care of a patient in Mexico for 30 years. Marcus tried to run, but Thomas grabbed him. The police were called. As they led Marcus away, he finally confessed. Richard had promised him a cut of the inheritance if they got rid of David. But when David survived, Marcus had to keep paying the Mexican hospital to keep him there, sedated and confused, while telling them he had no family. But the body, I said. We buried someone. David's expression darkened. A homeless man. Richard found someone, with no family, no one to miss him. The fire made identification impossible, except for the items, my wallet, my watch, my ring, all planted. Eleanor was crying now, but they weren't tears of sadness. My boy survived. You survived, and you found your way home. But the story wasn't over. That night, as we were all trying to process everything, Eleanor called me to her room. David was there too. Sarah, Eleanor said, there's something else. I've known Marcus was stealing for years. I let him because I had nothing to live for anyway. But I hired a private investigator 5 years ago. I knew David might be alive. I was stunned. You knew. She nodded. Not for certain, but a mother's heart. I never gave up hope. The investigator found traces, someone matching David's description in Mexico. Medical records that didn't add up. Payments Marcus couldn't explain. I've been waiting, hoping that somehow my son would find his way back. David knelt beside his mother's wheelchair, tears streaming down his face. All these years you never gave up on me? Never, Eleanor said firmly. Not for a single day. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The media got hold of the story. Dead son returns. The 30 years murder plot. Exposed headlines screamed. Marcus was charged with attempted murder, fraud, and embezzlement. He eventually confessed to everything, including how Richard had planned it all. But the most shocking revelation came during Marcus's trial. He revealed that there were others involved, prominent members of the community who had invested in Richard's scheme, expecting to get a piece of Eleanor's fortune once David was gone, and Eleanor died of grief. The list included the town mayor, the chief of police who had handled David's accident case, and even Dr. Klein. That's why the DNA results had come back early. Klein had been trying to warn Marcus that the truth was about to come out. One by one, they all fell. The corruption ran so deep that state investigators had to take over. Our quiet town was turned upside down. But through it all, Eleanor seemed stronger than ever. Having David back had given her a reason to fight. But not everyone believed the story. Some people whispered that this was all an elaborate con, that the real David was still dead, and this man had somehow fooled everyone, including the DNA test. They pointed out inconsistencies. How could someone survive such injuries? How could amnesia last exactly until Eleanor's health started declining and she began talking about changing her will? I had my own doubts that I kept private. Late one night, I found David standing in front of the family portrait taken just months before his accident. You really don't remember anything from those years in Mexico? I asked. He turned to me, and for just a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Not confusion, but calculation. Then it was gone. Fragments, he said. Like a dream, you can't quite recall. David, I said carefully. If you're not really David, if this is all some elaborate scheme, I need to know. Eleanor's heart can't take another loss. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Sarah, what makes someone who they are? Is it their DNA? Their memories? Or is it the love they carry for someone, even through decades of darkness? I may not remember every moment of being David Richardson, but I know with every fiber of my being that Eleanor is my mother. I know I would die for her. Isn't that enough? I never asked again, because I saw how Eleanor bloomed with him there. She started eating again, laughing again, living again. She even started walking short distances, something doctors said was impossible at her age. David was by her side every moment, reading to her, talking about plans for the future, making up for lost time. The fortune didn't matter to him. He signed documents, refusing any inheritance, saying he only wanted his mother. This silenced many critics, who insisted he was after money, but it raised other questions. If not money, then what? Why return now? The answer came 6 months later. Eleanor's health had improved so dramatically that doctors were calling it miraculous. She was out of the wheelchair, walking in the garden with David, when she suddenly stopped. "I need to tell you something," she said to him. "Your father's death wasn't natural," she continued. "Richard poisoned him, slowly, over months. I found out after you disappeared, but I had no proof. The police were in Richard's pocket. I've been waiting all these years for justice." David's face went pale. "Mom, I know why you really came back." Eleanor interrupted. "You remembered, didn't you? Not just me, but what they did to Walter, what they did to us." David nodded slowly. The memories came in pieces. Dad's sick. Uncle Richard, always there with his special tea. You crying at night. Then my accident. It all connected. Eleanor smiled sadly. "You came back to expose them all, not just for you, but for Walter." "And for you," David said. "They destroyed our family. They needed to pay." As I watched them together, I realized the truth didn't matter anymore. Whether he was David returned from the dead, or someone else who had become David through shared pain and purpose, he had given Eleanor something precious: justice and peace. The trials continued for 2 years. Marcus got 25 to life. The others received various sentences. The town slowly healed from the scandal, and through it all, Eleanor and David were inseparable. Eleanor lived another 3 years after David's return. They were the happiest years I'd ever seen her have. She died peacefully in her sleep, with David holding her hand. Her last words were, "I knew you'd come home." At her funeral, hundreds came to pay respects. David stood by the grave, and I heard him whisper, "I kept my promise, Mom. They all paid for what they did. Rest now." After Eleanor's death, David disappeared. He left a note saying he needed to find himself, to discover who he was without the mission that had driven him home. The inheritance went to charity, as Eleanor had specified in her new will. Some say they've seen him in different parts of the world, helping other families find justice, exposing corruption, fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. Others say he returned to Mexico, to the life he had built there during his lost years. But I know the truth. Every year, on Eleanor's birthday, a single white rose appears on her grave. No card, no message. Just the rose, the same kind David used to pick for her from the garden when he was a child. I saw him once, 3 years after Eleanor's death. I was visiting her grave, and he was there, in the distance, watching. He looked different, older, more at peace. Our eyes met across the cemetery. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of our shared secret, then walked away. I never saw him again. But I know he's out there somewhere. The boy who died and came back, or the stranger who became a son. It doesn't matter which. What matters is that he gave an old woman her heart back, exposed a web of evil, and showed us all that sometimes justice takes decades, but it does come. Some people still debate whether he was really David Richardson. They analyze photos, compare mannerisms, argue about the DNA test, but they miss the point entirely. He was David in every way that mattered, in his love for Eleanor, in his quest for justice, in his sacrifice of any inheritance for the simple right to call her mom. The Richardson mansion stands empty now, sold to a family from out of state who don't know its history. But sometimes, when I drive by at night, I swear I can see a light in David's old room and shadows of a mother and son reunited, if only for a brief, precious time. That's the thing about truth. Sometimes, it's not about facts or DNA or proof. Sometimes, it's about love so strong it can bring someone back from the dead or create them anew. Eleanor died knowing her son had come home. David, whoever he really was, gave her that gift. And in the end, isn't that the only truth that matters? Marcus died in prison last year. On his deathbed, he made one final confession. He swore that the man who came back really was David, that he had survived, that the Mexico story was true. But then he laughed and said, or maybe I just want to believe that, because the alternative, that someone loved Eleanor enough to become her dead son, is even more frightening. We'll never know for sure. The medical records from Mexico mysteriously disappeared. The DNA samples were contaminated in a lab fire. All we have are questions and a story that seems impossible but changed everything. But I choose to believe that love can conquer death, that justice can prevail even after decades, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the lost really do find their way home. Eleanor Richardson is buried next to her husband Walter now, and beside them is an empty plot with a headstone that reads David Richardson, lost and found. Whether he'll ever occupy that plot, or whether it will remain empty forever, a monument to a mystery that defined our town, only time will tell. But every year, on the anniversary of his return, I leave 2 roses on Eleanor's grave, one from me, and one for the son who loved her enough to come back from the dead, in whatever form that took. What you're about to hear will leave you speechless. This is the story of Harold Mitchell, an 82-year-old man who fooled everyone around him, and how his revenge became the most shocking revelation Golden Years Nursing Home had ever witnessed. I was there. I saw everything unfold. My name is Maria Rodriguez, and I was the night janitor at that nursing home for 15 years. Harold's story changed my life forever, but more importantly, it exposed the true nature of everyone around him. You won't believe what happened when the truth finally came out. Harold Mitchell looked like any other forgotten elderly resident when he first arrived at Golden Years. Worn clothes, trembling hands, no visitors. He took the cheapest room available, the one with the broken heater and the view of the dumpster. The staff treated him like he was invisible, or worse, like he was a burden. Head nurse Jennifer would roll her eyes whenever Harold needed something. The facility director, Patricia Barnes, would openly complain about welfare cases, like Harold draining their resources. But there was something different about Harold's eyes. Those pale blue eyes held secrets that none of us could have imagined. Every night when I cleaned his room, he would be sitting by the window, holding an old photograph of a young woman and a little girl. His wife and daughter, he told me once, died in a car accident 40 years ago. Since then, he'd been alone. The other residents had families who visited occasionally, brought flowers, pretended to care for an hour before leaving. Harold had no one. Well, technically he had a granddaughter, Emily, but she never came. Harold would talk about her sometimes, how she was a successful real estate agent, how proud he was of her achievements. But Emily never called, never visited, never even sent a card on his birthday. Before we continue with this incredible story, hit that subscribe button for more unbelievable true stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about human nature. Patricia Barnes made Harold's life particularly miserable. She would delay his medications, claiming the pharmacy was slow. She would serve him cold food, saying the kitchen was understaffed. When Harold's arthritis got worse and he needed help walking, Patricia denied his request for a better walker. State insurance doesn't cover upgrades, she said, with that fake sympathetic smile. But I saw her approve a brand new walker for Mrs. Henderson the same day, whose son was a local politician. One night, I was cleaning Harold's room when I found an envelope under his bed. It had fallen from his nightstand. The Chase Bank logo caught my eye, but I didn't open it. Harold was awake, watching me. "You're a good person, Maria," he said in that soft voice of his. "The only good person I've met here." He took the envelope and placed it back in his drawer. But I noticed something. There were more envelopes in there, all from different banks. Harold never complained about the treatment. When Jennifer forgot his heart medication 3 days in a row, Harold just smiled. When Patricia moved him to an even worse room in the basement, basically a converted storage room, Harold thanked her politely. The room was damp, cold, and had no emergency button. Perfect for someone who won't be around much longer anyway. Jennifer had laughed to another nurse, thinking Harold couldn't hear. But Harold heard everything, and he remembered everything. I started bringing Harold food from home. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches, soup, sometimes a piece of pie. He would tear up every time. "You don't know what this means to me," he would say. I also started buying his medications with my own money when Jennifer claimed they were back-ordered. Harold tried to refuse, but I insisted. "It's what anyone would do," I told him. But we both knew that wasn't true. No one else would do it. No one else even looked at Harold as a human being. One evening, Patricia came to Harold's room with a man in an expensive suit. They had papers for Harold to sign. "For your continued care," Patricia explained. "State funding isn't enough anymore. We need you to sign over any assets you might have." Harold looked at the papers, then at Patricia. "I don't have any assets," he said calmly. Patricia's face turned red with frustration. "Everyone has something," she snapped. "Even welfare cases like you must have some savings hidden away." That's when Harold did something unexpected. He laughed. Not a bitter laugh, but genuine amusement. "Mrs. Barnes," he said, "if I had money, do you think I'd be in this place?" Patricia stormed out, but the man in the suit stayed for a moment. He looked at Harold curiously, then left without a word. "But is Hulshokidichi Olanshe?" Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. The next week, Harold's health took a bad turn. He collapsed in the shower when no one was around to help. I found him 2 hours later, hypothermic and barely conscious. I called for help, but Jennifer took her time responding. "He's old," she said to Patricia later, not knowing I was listening. "Maybe this is nature's way of solving our Harold problem." Harold survived, but he was weaker. His hands shook more. He could barely walk, and his memory seemed to be slipping. At least, that's what everyone thought. Patricia and Jennifer became bolder in their cruelty. They would talk about Harold while he was in the room, as if he couldn't hear or understand. "Dead weight," Patricia called him. "Should have died months ago," Jennifer added. One day, Emily finally showed up, Harold's granddaughter, the successful real estate agent he was so proud of. But she didn't come to see Harold. She went straight to Patricia's office. I was cleaning nearby and overheard their conversation. Emily wanted to know about Harold's will, about his power of attorney, about his assets. "The old fool must have something hidden," Emily said. "Nobody works their whole life without saving something. Maybe he's got life insurance I don't know about." Patricia assured Emily they would work together to find out what Harold had. They even discussed having Harold declared mentally incompetent so Emily could take control of his affairs. "He's clearly showing signs of dementia," Patricia lied. "I could have our doctor write up an evaluation." I wanted to warn Harold, but when I went to his room, He was sitting in his chair, tears streaming down his face. He had heard everything. His own granddaughter, the only family he had left, was plotting against him. She used to sit on my lap and call me Pop-Pop, Harold whispered. I paid for her college, you know. Sold my car to make sure she could graduate debt-free. She doesn't even remember. That night, Harold asked me to sit with him. He couldn't sleep. Maria, he said, I need to tell you something, but you must promise to keep it secret until the right time. I promised. Then Harold told me the truth. He wasn't poor. He wasn't on welfare. Harold Mitchell was worth approximately $500 million. 40 years ago, after his wife and daughter died, Harold threw himself into his work. He built a technology company from nothing, pioneered several patents in early computer processing, and sold everything at the height of the dot-com boom. But the money meant nothing to him without his family. So he decided to live simply, anonymously, to see if he could find genuine human connection without the influence of wealth. I've been testing them all, Harold said. Every single person in this place. I wanted to see who would show kindness to someone who had nothing to offer in return. In 15 years, Maria, you're the only one who treated me like a human being. Just then, things were about to get even more interesting. Harold pulled out a business card from his drawer. This is my real lawyer, he said. Not the actor Patricia brought in. That was a test too. The card read Richardson and Associates, Estate Planning, one of the most prestigious law firms in the country. The next morning, Harold's real lawyer arrived, Charles Richardson himself, senior partner. Patricia nearly fainted when she saw him walk past her office and straight to Harold's basement room. They spent 3 hours together. When Richardson left, he stopped at my cleaning cart. Miss Rodriguez, he said, Mr. Mitchell speaks very highly of you. We'll be in touch soon. Patricia was in panic mode. She recognized Richardson from the business news. Why would someone like that be visiting Harold? She and Jennifer suddenly became very attentive to Harold's needs. Fresh flowers appeared in his room. His medications were delivered on time. Hot meals were served with a smile. Harold watched it all with amusement. Emily started visiting every day. She would bring Harold his favorite candies, talk about old memories, even cry about how much she missed him. I'm so sorry I haven't been around, Pop, she would say. Work has been so busy, but you're my priority now. Harold would pat her hand and smile, but his eyes remained cold. Here's where everything shifted completely. Harold decided to play along with their sudden kindness. He told Patricia he might have some bonds he forgot about, maybe worth a few $1,000s. Patricia's eyes lit up. He told Emily about a possible life insurance policy. Emily immediately offered to help him find the paperwork. But Harold was documenting everything. Every conversation, every cruel comment from before, every fake kindness now. He had a small recorder I had given him, and he captured it all. Patricia talking about overcharging Medicare for Harold's care. Jennifer admitting to selling Harold's medications to other residents. Emily on the phone with her boyfriend, laughing about her pathetic grandfather and how she would put him in an even cheaper home once she got his money. The transformation in how they treated Harold was sickening to watch, if you knew the truth. Patricia moved Harold to a better room. Jennifer personally administered his medications with care. Emily brought in a physical therapist to help with Harold's mobility, all of them circling like vultures, waiting for Harold to reveal where his supposed few $1,000s were hidden. Then Harold collapsed again. This time, it was real. His heart was failing. The ambulance rushed him to the hospital, and the doctors said he had maybe 48 hours to live. Patricia, Jennifer, and Emily all rushed to his bedside, not out of concern, but out of fear that Harold would die before signing over his assets. They brought papers to the hospital, power of attorney forms, asset transfer documents, even a new will Emily had drafted that left everything to her. Harold was weak, barely conscious, but they pressed the pen into his hand. "Sign here, Mr. Mitchell," Patricia urged. "For your care." Harold's hand shook as he signed. Emily could barely contain her excitement. But then something incredible happened. Harold didn't die. Against all odds, he stabilized. The doctors were amazed. It was as if Harold had been waiting for something, holding on for one final moment. And that moment came the next morning, when Charles Richardson arrived at the hospital with a briefcase and several other lawyers. "Ladies," Richardson announced to Patricia, Jennifer, and Emily, "I'm here to inform you that Mr. Harold Mitchell has made some significant decisions regarding his estate." Emily practically jumped from her chair. "Yes, Pop promised to take care of me," she said quickly. Patricia added, "And the nursing home has been promised a generous donation for our years of care." Richardson smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Perhaps you should all sit down for this." He pulled out a thick folder. "Mr. Mitchell is worth approximately $500 million. The room went silent. Emily gasped. Patricia's face went white. Jennifer dropped her coffee cup. "Furthermore," Richardson continued, "Mr. Mitchell has been documenting his treatment at Golden Years Nursing Home for the past 2 years. Every instance of neglect, abuse, and attempted fraud has been recorded." He pulled out a recorder and pressed play. Patricia's voice filled the room. "That worthless old man should just die already and stop wasting our resources." Emily tried to speak, but Richardson held up his hand. "There's more." He played another recording. Emily's voice this time. "I can't wait until the old fool croaks. I've already put a deposit on a new Lamborghini." The blood drained from Emily's face. "Pop, I didn't mean, I was just joking." But Harold wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. "Maria," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Come here, dear." I approached his bed, my legs shaking. Harold took my hand. "Ladies," Harold said, addressing Patricia, Jennifer, and Emily, "let me tell you what's going to happen. Patricia, you're going to be reported to the State Board for elder abuse and Medicare fraud. Jennifer, your nursing license will be revoked for medication theft and neglect. The police are waiting outside to arrest you both." Patricia and Jennifer looked toward the door in panic. 2 police officers were indeed standing there. "As for you, Emily," Harold continued, his voice filled with disappointment, "you're my biggest regret. I gave you everything, and you became nothing but greed incarnate." Emily was crying now. Real tears this time. "Pop, please. I'm your granddaughter. Your only family." Harold shook his head. "No, Emily. Family doesn't plot against you. Family doesn't celebrate your anticipated death. Family loves you when you have nothing to give." Richardson opened another document. "Mr. Mitchell's entire estate, all $500 million, will be placed in a trust, the Harold and Margaret Mitchell Foundation for Elder Care. It will build and operate nursing homes where elderly residents are treated with dignity, regardless of their financial status." He paused. "The foundation will be managed by Miss Maria Rodriguez." I couldn't breathe. "What? No, I can't. I don't know how to." Harold squeezed my hand. "You know how to care, Maria. That's all that matters. Charles will help you with the rest." Emily exploded. "You can't do this. I'm your blood. She's nobody. She's just a janitor." Harold's eyes flashed with anger. The first time I'd ever seen him truly angry. "She's the only person in 2 years who saw me as a human being. She spent her own money to buy my medications. She brought me food when you all tried to starve me. She held my hand when I was dying alone in that basement. She's not nobody. She's everything you could have been if greed hadn't poisoned your soul." Patricia tried to run, but the police stopped her. Jennifer was already in handcuffs. Emily fell to her knees, begging, pleading, making promises. But Harold was done listening. He turned to me. "Maria, there's one more thing. I'm not actually dying. The doctors gave me medication to slow my heart rate, to make it seem like I was at death's door. I needed them to show their true colors one final time." The room erupted in chaos. Emily screaming about lawsuits, Patricia threatening witnesses, Jennifer crying about her children. But Harold remained calm. "I wanted to believe," he said quietly, "that somewhere in this world kindness still existed without conditions. You proved it does, Maria. In my darkest moments, when I had nothing to offer, you gave me everything: dignity, respect, and genuine care." The police escorted Patricia and Jennifer out. Emily was told to leave and never contact Harold again. Richardson handed me a card. "We'll need to meet next week to discuss the foundation," he said. "Mr. Mitchell has grand plans. The first Harold and Margaret Mitchell Care Center will break ground next year." Harold lived another 5 years. We moved him to a beautiful private facility where he was treated like the remarkable man he was. I'd visited him every day, not as his janitor, but as his friend. He taught me about business, about running a foundation, about seeing the good in people while protecting yourself from the bad. The Mitchell Foundation now operates 57 nursing homes across the country. Every resident, regardless of their financial status, receives the same excellent care. We've helped thousands of elderly people live their final years with dignity and respect. Emily tried to contest the will, but the recordings buried her case. Patricia went to prison for fraud. Jennifer lost her license and now works at a gas station. But here's the part that still gives me chills. On Harold's last day, 5 years after that hospital confrontation, he told me one final secret. "Maria," he whispered, "I have one more surprise." He handed me a sealed envelope. "Open this after I'm gone." Harold passed away that night, peacefully, holding my hand. When I opened the envelope, I found a photograph, the same one he used to stare at every night, his wife and daughter. On the back he had written, "Margaret always said angels come in unexpected forms." She was right. "Thank you for being mine. Take care of our foundation. Love, Harold." There was also a personal check, $50 million made out to me personally, separate from the foundation. The memo line read, "For the sandwiches, the medicine, but mostly for seeing me." I cried for hours. I tried to donate it to the foundation, but Richardson stopped me. "Harold's instructions were clear," he said. "He wanted you to have security, to never worry about money again, so you could focus on helping others without fear." I still work at the foundation every day. I still clean rooms sometimes, just to remember where I came from. And in every facility, in the best room with the best view, there's a portrait of Harold Mitchell. Below it, a plaque reads, "Kindness is the only currency that matters." Emily reached out last year. She's broke now. Her real estate business collapsed during a market downturn. She asked for help, for forgiveness, for a second chance. I thought about what Harold would do. He believed in justice, but he also believed in redemption. I offered her a job at one of our facilities. As a janitor, she would start where I started, learn what I learned. She took it. Last week, I saw Emily helping an elderly man who had soiled himself. Instead of complaining or passing the job to someone else, she cleaned him gently, spoke to him kindly, preserved his dignity. Maybe Harold's final lesson wasn't just about justice. Maybe it was about transformation, about how the right circumstances can reveal who we really are or who we can become. The Harold and Margaret Mitchell Foundation continues to grow. We've exposed dozens of abusive facilities, reformed elder care laws in 17 states, and showed the world that profit and compassion can coexist. But none of it would have happened if Harold hadn't played his long game. if he hadn't endured 2 years of humiliation and abuse to prove a point. Some people say Harold was cruel, that he should have revealed his wealth sooner, stopped the abuse faster. But Harold knew something they didn't. He knew that true character only reveals itself when people think no one important is watching. He knew that the only way to build something better was to first expose how broken the system was. Every night before I leave the office, I look at Harold's portrait. Those pale blue eyes still hold secrets, still seem to be watching, still seem to be teaching. And I remember his words, "Money doesn't change people, Maria. It just reveals who they really were all along." The Mitchell Foundation has a motto now. Harold's words that we put on every building. Dignity is not a luxury. Respect is not optional. Kindness is not weakness. And every soul has value, regardless of their bank account. Harold Mitchell died with $500 million, but pretended to have nothing. In doing so, he found the one thing money couldn't buy, a true friend, and in return, he gave me something priceless, the chance to ensure no elderly person would ever suffer the way he chose to suffer, to prove a point that needed proving. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can feel Harold watching, nodding approvingly as another care center opens. Another elderly person receives the respect they deserve. Another Harold Mitchell gets the care he pretended not to need, but absolutely deserved. The truth is, we all have a Harold Mitchell in our lives. Someone we overlook, someone we dismiss, someone we treat as less than human, because we think they have nothing to offer. Harold's revenge wasn't just about punishing those who wronged him. It was about showing us all what we miss when we measure a person's worth by their bank account instead of their character. And that's the most shocking part of this story. Not that Harold was secretly rich, not that he fooled everyone, but that it took a fortune hidden in plain sight to make people realize that every elderly person in every nursing home deserves the same thing, to be treated like a human being. Harold Mitchell's greatest trick wasn't hiding his millions. It was revealing our poverty, the poverty of compassion in a system that sorts human beings by their ability to pay. And his greatest gift wasn't the foundation or the money. It was the reminder that sometimes the janitor cleaning your room might be the richest person you'll ever meet, just not in the way you'd expect.